What I am seeing in my office with my consultation clients day after day after day, it's horrifying. And these are people who are lovely, smart, wise, kind, thoughtful, I think could be even push themselves, even more ambitious people who completely silence themselves, who cut off their own wings in the names of these relationships. I've had it. I mean, I'm tired of this. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm tired of the fact that the mental health community hasn't launched enough of a response to this. I mean, I've made it a single-minded crusade, and I recognize that. But when I see in 1 hour, just explaining, just educating someone about their story, they walk out, and sometimes they'll email me 2 weeks ago, and they're like later, and they'll say, that's just it. I got it now, and I'm doing so much better. But these people, their health is falling apart. This isn't just like, oh, I'm having a bad day. Their health, the stress, the effect on their health in every possible way. People getting sicknesses that don't make sense. They make sense to me. Being in the proximity of someone who's behaving in such a toxic manner is a problem. And the other struggle for me is that many people say, well, the narcissist went through a lot too. I get it. I never, ever would say to someone, I would invalidate your trauma, but I'm always going to judge you on how you're behaving today.
I get that. I get that.
You know, and so it's this idea that, well, these bad things happen to me, so that is my rationale for why I'm going to continue to abuse you. That does not work for me.
Absolutely. Well, one of the first narcissists people meet is their parents.
Yes.
So with narcissists being 80% men, 20% women, does that fall into the parent guidelines as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
By and large, people are going to come in and talk about narcissistic fathers. However, because a narcissistic mother is so impactful, because in many families, the mother is often a primary caregiver,
right,
that they get more face time with her. And as a result, if she's narcissistic, the impacts may be more significantly felt.
We hear about more. I feel like I hear more about narcissistic mothers than I do fathers from the peripheral.
But I think it's an impact issue.
Right.
But I have to say, though, a lot of the women I work with will say, it's interesting, the narcissistic fathers would often get a pass because they were often just really authoritarian and really controlling. And it was as though all the fathers were like that. So their father didn't stand out per se, but if you had a particularly invalidating father, it makes an impact, particularly for women. And what is interesting is that, you know, we're in a generation now where we're seeing more same-sex parents. So if we see two men who are raising a child, you know, obviously if one of those men is narcissistic, then that's going to impact the child, and there may be a greater likelihood of that because it's more likely to be seen in men.
Right.
So there's some of the story sort of telling itself as we go, but it both, whether it's father or mother, it makes an impact, especially if the father is a particularly malignant narcissist and is cruel to the mother and to everyone in the family system. Even if he's just written off as the mean authoritarian dad, that cruelty really has impacts on everyone in the system and can pull the mom out of the parenting game. She's so beaten down by the narcissistic dad that she wasn't always able to rally for her kids.
So what are some signs that people can look for that could indicate that their parents, one or both of them, are narcissists?
You know, it's interesting. When they look back on their childhoods, it's as though they thought, well, this is how mom always was. Mom was always selfish. Dad never showed emotion. Dad was never empathic. You know, my parents were always entitled. It's the alwaysness of it that makes it hard. So it's looking at what we always look at in narcissism. We look at, were they empathic? Were they able to talk about emotions? Were they able to go deep with their kids? One thing that narcissistic family systems are characterized is by parents who focus a lot on achievement and how their child looks and how they look to the community. So they love their straight A kids or their soccer playing kids or their kid who physically looks the way they want them to. In some cases, with a really narcissistic parent, they may favor the child who more physically resembles them. And in narcissistic families, it's not unusual to have some really complicated dynamics where one child, or maybe more than one child, but typically one, becomes the scapegoat. Something about them is not pleasing the narcissistic parent. Yes. And it could either be at the level that they don't feel like that child's good enough, or that kid may be a threat. But they scapegoat that child, or and we'll also see in these systems, the golden child. The child that is viewed as the one who represents, who is emblematic of all that narcissistic parent values. And they'll put a disproportionate resource in that child. You would think like, oh, the golden child's got it made. And in fact, they're like, the golden child often feels survivor guilt. That they may be very fond of their siblings and feel like, why am I being zeroed out? And it also carries with it guilt and expectation. If you're the golden child, it becomes very clear to you that you could be toppled off that pedestal. The scapegoat child in the system can show all the kinds of symptoms you might see in a child who's been exposed to childhood neglect or abuse. They may be very untrusting. You'll see children in the system trying to protect siblings from narcissistic parents. It gets really, really complicated. But many times it's a story that tells itself backwards. Like I'm hearing more and more from people who watch our Med Circle videos that like, gosh, I saw that. That's my mom. That's my dad. Like they said, I didn't know there was a word for this. I just thought I really had a tough mom or dad. So a lot of times people who think of their parents as difficult, selfish, challenging, not available, not present, neglectful. Those kinds of adjectives should be red flags that you might have actually had a narcissistic parent. And I've always said, I don't care about the label. Call it what you will.
That's so important.
Yeah, call it what you will.
In case they haven't heard that, explain why the label doesn't really matter.
A lot of people get lost in like, are they narcissistic? I got to figure this out. Yeah. As though they're giving a diagnosis. Right. The adjective by itself is not diagnostic. No. If you really experience from this parent that they were difficult and selfish and cruel, there was an antagonistic quality to them, maybe I'll also help you circle that drain and say, yeah, your parent seemed narcissistic. It almost doesn't matter. If it felt like that, emotionally distant and invalidating and controlling a childhood, doesn't matter. It was still a miserable experience, and it's definitely something that shaped you. And that's the key. A parent shapes us. So now your personality is being shaped by a person who likely devalued emotion. I would say that over 90% of people who grew up in narcissistic family systems walk around with the mantra, I am not enough, haunting them for the rest of their lives.
Do narcissists walk around with that same mantra?
Okay, so that's yes. Short answer, yes, and it's how it manifests. So for the ordinary I'm not enougher, and I'm going to own it right now, I'm not enougher.
You're an I'm not enougher.
It's a mantra that's plagued me my whole life, and it makes me work myself too much and feel like I'm not enough as a mom, as a partner, as a friend. That's the monkey on my back.
Why do you feel that way?
It's historic for me. I think it's cultural. It's family of origin. It's the educational path I chose. So I always try to overcompensate, and as a result, I often get very exhausted. I can easily feel sad. I might be like, maybe I shouldn't say something. And of course they don't like me, like that kind of stuff. I mean, I put myself out in the world. I'm in therapy. I manage it, but it's always been there for me. Wow. So the way I manage that is by, like I said, sometimes trying to overcompensate, maybe do more than I should.
You're a doer.
I'm a doer. I'll work 100 hours a week because then I'll be more than enough, right? That's very different because I'm in touch with it. I have a lot of clients who are like, I'm not enough. And we're all on the same page. So I'm like, we got this. So they manage it. The problem is when a person's not aware of their I am not enoughness. And that's when you get into the territory of narcissism, because it's a core insecurity, right? But because they're not aware of it, they're always lashing out angrily at the world because they're so insecure. They're not enough. So why not walk around saying, I'm the greatest. Right. I'm the best. There's no one better than me. Validate me. Like me on social media because I'm the best. You can see how that's I'm not enough. Tell me I'm enough. Come on, tell me I'm enough, But they're not in touch with us. They get very angry when they're not told I'm not enough. That's the validation seeking. Those of us who own it as a neurotic conflict, we in spaces like therapy can catch ourselves and say, no, I'm all right.
Right.
I'm all right.
Okay, so if we think our parents are narcissists and we still have to show up at Thanksgiving and they're still going to come visit their grandkids, how do I manage this relationship without losing my hair?
Okay, so it goes back to what we've already talked about. We've put out there as the classical ways of managing any narcissistic relationship. As soon as you recognize what this pattern is, I always tell people with their parents, go on a little data gathering trip. Spend about 3 to 6 months and watch the patterns. Because as soon as you have the template, you're going to realize the patterns are as consistent as the rising sun. They just like, oh yeah, she doesn't validate this, and she's hypersensitive about that, and she's hypocritical about this. You knew it all along, but once you identify it as a pattern, you realize like it's like this every single time.
You can forecast the weather now.
Exactly. And with that, you can engage in those realistic expectations and the radical acceptance that are critical to managing these relationships. So I tell people, if you have a narcissistic parent or parents, whether you see them every day or once a year, you have got to prepare for those interactions like you're going into a job interview. You've got to take a mindful moment, check in with yourself, make sure your expectations are on board. Remember all of the sort of the little minefields, the places where things pop, and be ready for it. Expectations, boundaries. I sometimes have clients who set timers, who know that their heart out is 3 o'clock or whatever. And then when they go into the situation, okay, they don't overengage, they don't fall for the critical comments, they don't defend, they don't explain. Sometimes parents will be onto it and saying, "My, aren't you being very quiet?" And they'll dig and they'll go and you'll say, "No, I just love listening to what you have to say. You know, it's been a long time. I haven't seen you in a while."
Isn't that a game?
It is a game.
It's a game.
And that's the only way it's going to work. Otherwise, you're going to get back down in the mud. Once you feel it's bubbling up to a toxic level, you got to get out.
What about the person who goes, "I don't want to play a game with my parents. I don't."
Okay, then don't. But don't think you're going to educate them on it. A lot of people will say, "I've watched the Med Circle video. I've met with you, Dr. Ramani. I got this. I'm going to go tell them." I'm like, slow down, sister. This is not going to work.
You're not going to change them?
It's not going to work, and it's going to inflame them. Because I think so many people want to tell the narcissistic parent, "I've got you figured out." The best, I mean, it's like Sun Tzu in The Art of War, right? Once you have, like, it's almost like you don't want to announce battle until the last possible moment, and even then, you want to be stealthy. You want to come around this and not engage them. Knowing what it is, you can protect yourself from more hurt, but you cannot change them. So a lot of people say, "This feels very superficial." I say, okay, if you're deciding between superficial and combative, I'm going to choose superficial any day of the week.
All day long. Yeah.
So that's the issue, is that people say, "Well, this doesn't feel good." I said, neither did the other.
Right.
Some people aren't willing to give up these relationships. It may be because they love their brothers and sisters, but they don't like their parents are narcissistic, and they don't want to. They want to go to the family gatherings. They might find their children actually do like their grandparents, and as grandparents, their parents are serviceable. So it doesn't mean you need to engage. And talking about it 20 years later ain't going to make it better.